Whenever we hear the name Viking, the first thought that comes to mind is a large, burly man who stinks of salt water and mead, with a large horned helmet who is preparing to attack an unarmed village. This view of the Vikings is furthered by the view held by historians as recently as the 1920s. As Ezra Bowen wrote in 1928, "But the Norsemen were not a commercial people, they were fishermen and raiders." This is also seen in the 1930s in children's picture books, but owing chiefly to the influence of their paganism, so inhumanly brutal that rarely in history have raiders been so feared for their cold ferocity. This view was challenged in 1962 with the discovery of Viking ships outside the Danish town of Roskilde. Of the 5 ships currently at the Vikingskibsmuseet, there is an ocean-going trade vessel, a coastal trade vessel, a large and a small longship, and 1 fishing vessel. The image shown above is known as Skåldelev 1, and it is the ocean-going trader. It was built in the 11th century, around 1030, in the town of Sognefjord on the western coast of Norway. It is made primarily of pine wood, with repairs to it done with Danish oak. It is 15.84 meters long and 4.8 meters wide in breadth. The ship had a crew of 6 to 8 men with slots for 2 to 4 oars, as well as a large sail with an area of 90 square meters. It had a top speed of 13 knots, but it would average between 5 and 7 knots. Per Brunn wrote in his article, The Viking Ship, about the evolution of the Viking ships. Starting in 320 AD, the Scandinavian seamen had ships that depended solely on oars for travel. This limited the early Vikings to the Baltic Sea until the introduction of the sail. It was not until the vessel started using sails that the real far-reaching Viking vessels appeared and operated in the Scandinavian countries, England, France, and several Slavic countries in the Baltic Sea. It is good that all of the vessels found at Skåldelev are all of a different make, because it shows us the in-depth nature of the Vikings' travel. The most interesting of the ships, however, is Skåldelev 1. It shows that the Vikings were not just raiders and fishermen. It shows that they developed large enough ships to ship an estimated 24 tons of goods across the ocean. One of the biggest clues that this ship is not designed to go on a raid is the lack of oars. A warship, such as Skåldelev 2, the Great Longship, has a solid deck with oars along the entire length of the ship. The trader above has 2 half-decks, one at the bow, one at the stern, leaving a large area for cargo in the middle of the vessel. The oars at these half-decks were likely only used when the ship was in tight navigational areas, such as narrow straits or sounds. The physical evidence of the ships themselves is a good source, but there is also evidence to show just how widespread the Vikings went to trade. Richard W. Unger wrote an article in Archaeology about the Vikings' trade. They had established regular trade between the Baltic and the Black and Caspian seas. Goods such as furs, honey, and amber filled the boats that traveled down the Don and Volga rivers. Vikings exchanged the goods of the northern forest for silver coins and works of art from the workshops of Constantinople and Baghdad. Unger goes on to write that the Skåldelev finds are the most impressive finds of their kind, revealing more about the Viking trade in their commercial sense than ever before. This is furthered by evidence seen in the writings of the Arab dignitary Ibn Fadlan, who called them Rus. I saw the Rus, who had come for trade and had camped by the river Ityl, or as we know it today, the Volga. This shows that Viking traders not only traveled across oceans, but also inland across rivers. Fadlan goes on to write in a later entry, "Then they brought a bed and placed it on the boat and covered it with a mattress and cushions of the Byzantine silk brocade." This again demonstrates just how widespread the Vikings traded, as it would be very unusual for the Vikings to push so far into the Mediterranean for a raid, or go all the way through the lands of modern-day Russia to do more than trade. Accounts of Viking raids on the Atlantic coast of Europe cannot be denied. and the Vikings were fearsome warriors who did attack defenseless monasteries and towns across Europe, going so far as being hired as mercenaries as far south as Byzantium. But despite their prowess in battle and the bloodthirsty image of a Viking berserker, the Vikings did understand the value of trade. They developed trading vessels that could travel across open oceans and allowed them to trade all over Europe and into the Mediterranean, encountering cultures from the Kievan Rus to the Anglo-Saxon English to the far-off Muslims with whom they traded. The ship known today as Skoldilev I gives us an impressive insight into these not-so-barbaric people we call the Vikings. From trading the woods, furs, and ores of their homeland in the harsh Scandinavian north for the beautiful art and valuable silver of Byzantium and the Islamic world, to the selling of looted goods and enslaved people across Europe. The Vikings were much more interested in trade than the stereotypical image of a Viking would suggest.